Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. It is just after 1 o'clock, and we are switching back to the FY26 budget. And we had some questions about the Bond Bank Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, which is a new program. So we've asked Commissioner Farrell and Treasurer Pichek to come and talk to us about all of that. So we wanted.
Madam Chair, may I set the table and then pass it to the treasurer?
Absolutely. And Treasurer can join now or later, whatever you want to do.
I'm going to look short next to Mike, so I don't. I'm going to hand these. I apologize, members of the committee and Madam Chair, if I've already given you this handout. It's hard for me to keep track of what I've talked about.
It might be under a pile. It's not like we don't have anything. That would be on top.
So thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Alex Farrell, Commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development. So the proposal here is the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. This was developed in collaboration with the Agency of Natural Resources, as well as with the Vermont Bond Bank. To provide a bit of history as to why bringing this forward, there's a recognition that right now one of the biggest hurdles to getting many housing projects off the ground is the initial infrastructure investment. What's especially challenging about that is there's no cash flow that comes from the infrastructure, so it becomes really difficult for financing, and so you need to lay all the infrastructure at times millions of dollars in order to just get to unit number one. Decades ago, municipalities had the capacity, both financially and otherwise, in order they could make this investment on their own, using bonding, et cetera. But we've come to recognize that our municipalities don't have that type of capacity oftentimes, but municipalities would invest in the infrastructure, turn it over to developers, recognizing they'd get the benefit of the grand list increase. So what this fund is seeking to do is make low interest capital available to municipalities. The infrastructure that we're talking about here could be transportation infrastructure, so it could be roads and sidewalks, or it could be water and wastewater going into a project. The requirement would be that it would have to have a direct nexus to housing production, so it would have to relate to the housing targets for their region, which have been developed. These would operate as a revolving loan fund. And in a moment here, I can pass it off to Treasurer Pichek, who can explain a way that we can stretch these dollars more by using this 9.1 as loan loss reserves and perhaps have a greater impact with this money than just the 9.1. I'm happy to pause there and answer any questions about the proposal itself.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Okay.
Could you tell me what kinds of projects would not be eligible for the clean water and drinking water state revolving fund that this would allow for? Because the clean water money is some things aren't eligible for that.
As I understand, and I'd have to defer to the Agency of Natural Resources on this, but yeah, in some cases, that funding is just hard to access, either based on the size of the municipality or the ability of the project itself. And so this would try to fill those gaps or actually complement that source in some cases.
So it's not a technical criteria, maybe that they can't come up with the match money for the project. So this is going to take care of the match money?
That may be. I don't envision that would always be the case, but that may be the case.
Do you have the program? Doesn't sound like the program is fully designed in terms of how all those things are going to work at this point.
I'd say this is a truncated version of sort of the draft program design.
Okay.
And you can see on the back some of the criteria and eligible activities. So I think Michael Gahn, when he's available, could give maybe greater details to what's envisioned right now.
And he's from ANR. Dave?
I'm sorry, I should clarify. Michael Gahn is from the Bond Bank, and then the best contact at Agency of Natural Resources would likely be Brian Redmond.
Okay.
Couple of questions, if I may. Why 9.1? Not 5.1, why not 15?
It was a matter. That's a really good question. Thank you, Representative. It was a matter of what we could find in the budget.
Okay, what was left over? Any idea what 9.1 will buy?
I
About
may.
one project? Or we-
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and pertinent to the treasurer joining me today. We would hope to perhaps use this 9.1 as loan loss reserve so we could actually stretch that much further to serve more than, say, just a handful of projects. Because as you can imagine, investing just 9.1, if you look just down the street here at Country Club Road, that in itself will cost $5 or $6 million for the infrastructure for that project. So the goal here would, to your point, be to stretch these much further.
And how has this been financed previously over the many years of development?
How is the infrastructure been financed? Sure, certainly. So lately, projects have been bearing this cost. So in the decade since our municipalities were taking this on, the projects have been taking this on themselves. And this is why you're often seeing really high unit costs or per unit costs of these projects. And so sometimes when people look at the investments my team makes through CDBG or perhaps Gus Seelig makes through VHCB, and people say, how on earth is it costing $550,000, $600,000? Well, that's because oftentimes the investment isn't going just to the structure itself, it's going to put in this infrastructure. So that along with other financing mechanisms, municipalities who have the administrative capacity to establish a TIF district have been able to use TIF as a mechanism to fund infrastructure for these projects.
We believe if we help to subsidize in this instance, that it will be reflected in lower housing costs for Vermonters.
Yes.
Materially significant or?
No, I think it would be materially. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom and then Jim?
Two questions. First one, was there not money available through the infrastructure bill from the previous administration that had money for infrastructure like this or infrastructure? And I mean, there's been questions about whether or not housing projects have money. And this sounds like this is actually not going to be coming from that fund, that this would be state fund. Is that correct? And if so, why?
That's right. Thank you, Representative Stevens. So a lot of that funding went towards other types of infrastructure. And as I understand it, it was rather than where this would be focused on extensions and upgrades specific to housing, a lot of those were going to sort of deferred maintenance. Now, I think some ARPA dollars were used to generate, say, new systems, like in South Hero, where that will benefit housing, but this would be seeking to set aside some specifically for this purpose, serving housing.
And I understand the box is entitled hypothetical terms, so that's whether they're ideas or whether they're waiting to get baked in. But you said that it's harder to get loans for these projects or for these portions of the projects because there's no revenue generated or directly generated. So how does this get paid back? If it's a revolving loan fund, the goal is to pay it back so that there's money for a project somewhere down the line. My knowledge of revolving loan funds is that they have to get built up to a certain level before they actually become solvent enough to have money coming in and out all the time. How would that work with this?
That's rather than me try to answer that, I'd probably defer to either Michael Gahn from the bond bank or the treasurer if he wishes to weigh in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have Jim and then John and then me.
So, how would this, and, say like the any tips that are being proposed for targeted housing projects? I know a traditional tip like that's financing that infrastructure, the water and sewer for a whole host of places that need it. How would this?
Messages, summary, pay on pay toll bill within 12 hours.
How would it be different than that?
So that's a great question. In this case, it wouldn't be leveraging funds funding based on the value of the property and thus the future property tax value. This would be municipal, the municipality would be taking out a loan to access these funds. So in some ways, it would likely go towards similar projects, but it wouldn't need to. So it's being proposed that you're likely referring to as Spark or HIT, these project-based TIFs. Right.
Yeah, I've heard different things.
Those would only be project specific. And so while this may be specific to a project like Country Club Road or Prospect Heights, it wouldn't necessarily be. It could be a municipal extension of a water or wastewater line where they know they want to enable housing. So it could serve multiple projects.
Okay.
Thank you. John?
I know you're gonna get to this at some point, just looking at but trying to prioritize potential projects here. And you know, project readiness is always that big thing. Are we ready to go? So we can utilize the money within a reasonable time frame. Is that, does things need to be shovel ready? Do you have communities that are looking at this already and talking to you? I'm guessing probably and say we're looking for.
It's a great point, Representative. And I'd say, yes, there's a long list of
I think I know the answer. But
you can, well, but you can hear from regional planning commissions, I think, who also do a great job of maintaining these lists of what projects are out there, what their current gaps are, and what the needs are. And so, I think a few examples would be like Country Club Road or Winston Prouty and Brattleboro, that a lot of them could have moved a lot quicker had there been a fund like this available.
some municipalities have been in the process of planning for so long, but they just are stuck to get started.
You're exactly right.
Thank you.
So, my turn. I have a couple questions. How did Stonecrop finance its infrastructure? Because that's a big. Sorry, I mean, you all were there, you know what happened. So it's in Middlebury, there's 250 units.
It was I think that's where the Middlebury College stepped in and provided the investment, was specifically on the infrastructure. So they helped provide the capital and did it. I think it was like a 5.5% loan over 7 years. So
So I know Middlebury College bought the land.
they owned the land, yeah.
They own the land, but they helped finance the infrastructure.
Yeah, and that was sort of, they're sort of acting as a municipality in some ways by sort of getting the land ready, offering it on favorable terms, and then helping with the infrastructure.
Okay, so that's very different. And then secondly, on another subject, the bond bank is going to be administering this, and what sort of fees are they charging? Does that get taken out of the loan? Are they doing, getting fees from each loan, or how are they funding themselves to do this?
I mean, it'd be great. The treasurer does serve on the bond bank board, but it would be a good question for Michael Gahn about how he plans in this particular situation. Generally, there is some administrative or underwriting fee. We've had in a relationship with the bond bank where they took, I'll just say, they look at it really hard and they don't overcharge. They're a small organization that does a lot of good work with a small workforce. We had about $20 million with them from our office for municipal bridge financing for FEMA. And they didn't charge any administrative fees on those loans because of the nature of the emergency and getting money to municipalities. So my experience with them is that they're very cost conscious
Okay.
in terms of the fees.
So that is to be determined, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, or Michael would just know better how he plans to.
I'm assuming that they're on board with this proposal at this point.
Yes.
Okay. And then my last question, and then I think we have some other questions besides me. You have hypothetical terms, but a maximum of 4 million doesn't get you very far with the $9 million, loan fund. I mean, is the idea to get a couple of projects under your belt? I mean, then I've heard you talk about loan loss reserve, which is an entirely different way of doing it. So, I mean, how many projects of sort of generally typical size, if there is something, would you expect you'd be able to fund out of this?
I'd say there's a couple things that come to mind in response to that. So the first would be that the goal would be for this to not always be the only source in funding these. So ideally, it could be complemented by other existing sources, be it the state revolving funds from Agency of Natural Resources or some other federal fund. So hopefully this wouldn't have to be the only sourcing. I think the treasurer could also speak to how we could make that go further with loan loss reserves. But The final point I'd make is, one of the goals of establishing this fund is, being able to contribute more to it later as needs increase.
All right. Right. Dwayne, did you have a question?
So, we're putting a lot of money into VHCB. And that money flows through you too. Is there no, the money that we're putting into VHCB, is that not paid infrastructure at all? I'm trying to find, is there overlap between the clean water infrastructure money, this money, and anything that's flowing through VHCB?
It's a really good question. VHCB receives direct appropriations, so I don't get any say in their operations or how they invest. But what I can say is this would benefit VHCB's investments, and that they would, any of their projects that they invest in that benefit from these investments would have a lower per unit cost, because this could be contributing to that infrastructure cost.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts here. My understanding of most of the HCBs is that they do infill or rehab in places that already have these facilities, such as St. Albans City or Burlington, or places where they don't have to fund a lot of infrastructure. But the second question I have is, would these be able to be used for single-family homes that are outside of developed areas, such as just like the country club, for instance, or, a half mile from a place that's not a designated something or other?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, thank you, Representative. Wonderful questions. I'd say VHCB does certainly fund a lot of infill, so where there's already developed area. Not always, though. I mean, sometimes they will fund what's somewhat of a greenfield, even if it's adjacent to developed area. They do try to prioritize designated areas. This funding, the goal would be to not restrict it just to designated areas. For example, that is one of the restrictions in certain other funding sources that we'd like to be able to overcome with this. But I do want to be clear that those smart growth principles would still be embedded in project selection. So we wouldn't want to fund something that doesn't make sense with the broader perspective of land use planning. The question of, could this serve single family homes? Yeah, absolutely. It certainly could. Thank you very much.
So the bond bank would be making the loan decisions, because they'd be underwriting loans.
Yes. And we would form a grant agreement with the bond bank to ensure that we essentially have say in program design.
Yeah, one other thing that occurs to me, in the capital bill, we have stuff that deals with all of these things. There's state money, there's federal money that they put together and they package it. Is that something that you're planning on taking advantage of, or how does that fit into this?
I think that could be a complementary source, absolutely. That's not specifically contemplated in here, aside from that the goal of this fund is to leverage other sources.
Yeah. So, putting the TIF issue aside, communities right now can bond for infrastructure. If they want to build a housing, someone wants to build a housing, they can say, yes, it's worth it. We're going to, extend our existing infrastructure, or in some cases, build a new infrastructure to service that. What's the advantage of doing it this way versus doing it through our traditional municipal bond?
Defer to some of more financial expertise than myself.
Well, I guess the thing I'd point out is the bond bank, any municipality for the most part, except for maybe the city of Burlington, and also Stowe has their own credit rating, they would go through the bond bank for that kind of lending. So if you had a program like this, it could be that they issue a bond, but that this portion of this is buying down the rate. So it's even less expensive to town, to the taxpayers in that particular town. It might incentivize them to issue the bond. It's a better question for Michael Gahn, but the bond bank has a whole variety of funding sources that they could facilitate, that kind of investment at the municipal level. So it may be in partnership with a locally issued bond for infrastructure.
So the rate might be a little lower.
Yeah.
But you still got to pay back the bond, right? In either case, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It says it's got, the hypothetical says it's a 20% probability of forgiveness, so it won't be
Who
paying.
pays for the forgiveness?
I think it, well, good, Alex.
Sure, well, so in this case, it would come from the fund. So that's part of the purpose of setting up a fund is to account for either forgiveness or delayed repayment, or that the difference between, if they're offering at a lower rate, that would be the purpose of taking funds from this fund.
So again, given the hypothetical terms here, if this money, what would happen if this money were available on July 1 versus if it were not, in terms of if there's an indication that this is a program that is worth setting up, having a box of hypothetical terms tells me that there's a lot of I's and T's that have to be dealt with. What's the difference between receiving the money July 1st or EAA or next year? If this is setting up a program that, again, I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. So, and Representative Stevens, I understand the question to be, could we establish the program now, but not appropriate until next year?
Or just assume that there's still work to do, that the idea is well formed, but the process that we've been asking about is not necessarily ready for prime time. So, yeah, would it be, setting up an idea of this and then funding it later or what have you? I'm just curious. I mean, we're in the seat, we're trying to find out if this money is going to be available and used immediately.
Thank you. That is a great question, Representative Stevens. Given the amount of thought that has gone into this between the Agency of Natural Resources, our team, and the Vermont Bond Bank, I'd say the concepts are pretty baked. And for example, what's in statute was agreed to as sort of the basic structure. And then this is sort of putting more flesh on the bone. But as I say, this is a truncated version of what's been floating between these three organizations. So to answer your question in short, we could stand it up and begin operating the program very quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Wait,
So along those lines, who's going to administer it from your office?
Good question.
Usually when we're talking, I just came out of the institutions committee, we always asking whether or not we're going to get the money out of the door or what it is. And do you have the staffing necessary, or is it going to be additional staff costs or those kinds of things? Any thoughts?
Thank you. That is a good question. So in this case, the bond bank would actually be administering it. So we would develop a grant agreement between my shop and the Vermont Bond Bank, and they would administer the program.
The bond bank has the capability of contracting and project design or approving project design, engineering, that sort of stuff.
It's probably a better question for Michael Gahn, but I'd say a lot of that would be joint partnership. And I haven't heard any concern from Michael that they don't have capacity to operate this. This is largely in line with other funds that they operate.
Mm-hmm. Same kind of tasks that we can ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just real quick. So would there be like a rolling calendar, like an open application anytime for this, or would you have like the standard?
Right.
Since you have a chance to all these
Yeah.
projects.
It's a great question that's not contemplated, and I could see benefits of either mechanism operating.
Just thinking municipalities could be all in different places here, perhaps. Maybe they've done a project engineering, but I'm trying to figure out how to pay for it after that.
Right. Sometimes the benefit of a rolling is that you can be
Starting right from scratch.
That's right. Yeah. And planning and engineering to that point represent
It's a long time.
those activities are eligible to do this as well.
I saw that.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm kind of why I'm asking that question.
yeah.
And this is an example.
That's right.
moving along a little bit. We've heard the commissioner. It's brought the treasurer. I'm interested, what is the treasurer's role in all this? Because we keep referring to the bond banks, but actually administer. So what's the treasurer's role?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. Happy to just sort of provide a little bit of overview. It was really to come and talk about the 9.1 million. And we've had a conversation with Michael Gahn. This is something that caught our eye when this was proposed, because we know infrastructure is a really critical issue for housing. The lack of infrastructure is holding back the development of more housing in a lot of local communities. And the other reason that this from a personal standpoint, that I like the idea of the state supporting more infrastructure is that when you support the infrastructure, it's agnostic as to, what is built on or around it. So it's a way to support not just affordable housing, but workforce housing, market rate housing, and we need all of that. So the idea caught my attention for that reason. And then the 9.1 million caught my eye because we were interested if there are ways to additionally leverage that money to have a bigger impact working with our office. And I've had an initial conversation with the bond bank. Michael's on vacation this week. So when he's back, we want to continue to have that conversation.
How would you leverage it?
So funds, we have a program in our office that we talked to the committee about, the 10% Vermont program. So that's a program, we've worked with the bond bank on that program, and we've worked with other organizations. So that money, that's 9.1, were used to help, again, be a loan loss reserve or buy down a rate in our office. We potentially could lend more money or at a reduced rate than what we traditionally do. So that was the conversation we wanted to have with Michael Gahn when he's back.
Okay, if we didn't do this, for example, what's to stop you from using your 10% for housing now?
Well, we have a limit as to how much we can lend. So about 10% of the state's cash balance. Well, the cash balance is quite high, but we like to be conservative with the number. Yeah. So the cash balance is like 1.7 billion. But the amount that we've capped ourselves at is 115 million of lending. 15. Yeah.
Okay, that's still a lot of money.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that's committed right now, but.
About 100 million. But we've generally focused on housing projects specifically, not on infrastructure. So it'd be yeah, exactly. And we could do it at we could do even more if we had this, depending on how the program is structured. Again, we want to talk to Michael Gahn, but we could do it at even greater capacity.
When you're doing it that way, it's expensive than setting up this bond bank proposal.
If we were to do it, we would help the bond bank facilitate it. So we wouldn't do it directly. We would just be helping the bond bank facilitate the program like we have with other loans to them.
I'm asking about interest rate.
Yeah, it could be less depending on, again, it's either going to be more money or less interest rate, depending on the structure of the program.
Commissioner, do you have any idea of any projects that are likely to be able to help if we proceed with this?
I think it would depend on, to Treasurer's point, it would depend on the structure. So if we only use this 9.1 million itself for loan loss reserves, I mean, it would be a matter of what we choose to award per project. So if we hit the full proposed cap, probably just a few. If we didn't hit the proposed cap and kept it lower, the simple math. In that case, one of the considerations would be how many units could we get, most bang for the buck. So if we find a 300 unit development like Winston Prouty, that would be prioritized for, say, $1 million investment. We're finding with those projects, Prospect Heights, Winston Prouty, others, that 1 million can go a long way to get them over that hurdle. So I think you could see hundreds of units benefit from this, at least hundreds of units.
One thing I'll just add on, again, a brief conversation I had with Michael Gahn at the bond bank is he already has ideas separate from what I was talking about to leverage the money. So he can speak much better to that and what he's thinking, but absent even additional opportunity from our office, he has ideas about how to leverage the 9.1.
No, it's actually John.
That was actually
I
John.
was just relaying.
But you could use it to piggyback on other potential funding sources here too, to fill the gap.
I think that's
Yes.
Michael's vision. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure that's clarified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Area budgets.
Mine, because it's in ACCD. It's in the ACCD request for one-time appropriations, the B
It's,
802.
it's not, Congress treated it all.
No, well, no, I don't believe so. I think it's always arguable.
Okay, no, I'm just,
Yeah.
obviously, if we're gonna proceed, we need some follow-up, because it sounds like there's some loose ends. We don't know how it's gonna partner with other monies in the treasurer's office. And we don't know the timing of this as to when we would be able to actually put it. I think unless I'm missing something.
I wouldn't say the timing would be any different than any other program that would be stood up. Any other one-time investment, it's just a matter of getting grant agreements signed and advertising the program. So I think you'd be seeing this active in a matter of a couple of months.
Wait,
How would the bond bank pay for the administration of this?
I think, Michael Gahn will have to come in and talk about his specific vision for this, but, they have a lot of different programs. There's usually some sort of administrative fee for their loans that built into the interest rate. So when those are getting paid back, they're paying for their operations. I mentioned there is a loan that we have with them where they have not taken an additional administrative charge. They ate that administration themselves and they passed it along. So I only reference that in that I know their mission is to help municipalities, not to enrich themselves or grow the bond bank. So they're very, diligent with what their rates are and what their administrative costs are.
anything else you want to add before we conclude?
I don't think so. I think it'd be great to get Michael Gahn in here to flesh out some more of this.
Has the House General and Housing Committee looked at this?
They have, it's currently in their committee bill.
Their housing bill?
That's right, the program design is currently in there.
In their letter too.
It's in there.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for coming in. Part of our education. Committee, we're going to take a short break, and I believe our next testimony is going to be with DHR, the classification system at 2 o'clock.